Hello, football fans. Welcome back to the Scuffed Football Podcast. This is week 5, right? Yeah. This is Noah. I'm Ted. We're here to cover the previous week, talk stories, scores, fantasy, gambling, the whole 9 yards from everything that was football this week. I didn't get a chance to watch a whole lot of football live. I think Noah was kind of in the same boat, so we both kind of caught up and got a few notes on just about every game. We'll try and run through them as quick as we can and then move along. I guess the most sensible place to start is to talk about Miami and Cincinnati. Most notably, most obviously, is the Tua injury. Look, I don't know how you felt about it. I think it's dangerous to let the guy play, obviously, especially after we watched him wobble on Sunday, not being able to walk.
Right.
But I don't know that even like a healthy quarterback stayed in that game after the hit that got delivered to Tua again. Obviously, there's extra risk and extra damage because you're letting a previously concussed guy play and be in a position to take another injury again. But I think this is just a tough spot for everybody, and you know, dangers of playing football. But obviously, it feels terrible for Tua.
Yeah, agreed. I think that, I mean, first of all, as soon as we saw him forget how to walk against the Bills, I think that should have been, instant, take him out for the game. And again, seeing that scariness again, I was reading the thing that, he technically didn't even pass some of those protocols and still played in the game, especially a franchise quarterback like that. I know the Dolphins organization is probably not happy with how they handled that, the medical field on that. But yeah, that's scary stuff right there.
Yeah. I beyond just harping into the injury, and I mean, by the time we're posting this on Tuesday, I'm sure you've heard it everywhere you've wanted to hear it, and then some. But just to push that a little further down the line and to take that story a kind of different direction, watching this game with Bridgewater in it, as far as the Dolphins season goes, or whenever they get a healthy Tua back, I don't know that Bridgewater's the worst option. I think he had a pretty solid day. And obviously, he wasn't as explosive as Tua was, but I think to consider their season moving forward, beyond the injuries and neglect of the injury again. I mean, I don't know how much stepping down in quarterback helps, and I want to kind of shout that back out to you, mostly because we talked about like the value in going to get Bridgewater this offseason.
Right. Again, I think that out of the backup quarterbacks, we had discussed that he was probably the most viable starting caliber quarterback for a backup. Again, not including Jimmy Garoppolo, who has just proved everything today or yesterday. But again, going back to the Dolphins, I think he's able to carry them to stay with their head above water. I don't think he's going to be the quarterback, obviously, to lead them to a winning record. Let's say, they have to play 4 weeks without Tua. I think he can deliver a 2-2 record, and I think that will be enough to keep them in the playoff picture. But I don't think he's going to go 4-0, obviously. I don't believe in that. But on the other side, I know we're talking a lot Dolphins here. I think we're seeing the Bengals round back into form. I'm liking the Bengals look in the past 2 weeks, and they're starting to look kind of like they made a Super Bowl, and I think that's going to be nice to see.
Yeah, that was my next ticket was to just, I guess, take a barometer on what this game means, right? I mean, obviously beating the Dolphins in any capacity is really good. I mean, you could have a lot of high school quarterbacks find some semblance of success thrown to those two receivers and behind that line. So like even to beat Bridgewater, I don't think is any small task for Cincinnati. I thought their defense did really well. But I thought it was a good measurement stick to see how well Cincinnati can compete against higher level teams. I thought the most notable takeaway from me for Cincinnati was their like the way that they played a spread offense. That field felt twice as wide as it actually was, and I like the entire game. It just felt like it was ripping Miami apart to be so spread out. They've got a lot of speed. Obviously, I have infinite faith in Joe Burrow's ability to be a great quarterback. I think it was very cool, like you said, to see what Cincinnati can do now that they're kind of rounding back into shape. But with that, I also noticed that this wasn't a blowout performance from the Bengals. And I'm wondering if we're going to see the Bengals just be still stuck in that purgatory of, very tight windows, whether they win or lose, basically being a 1-score game.
Right. I mean, agreed. I would be concerned for that. Again, they won against a team that didn't have Tua for most of it. So I'm I don't know how much of a strength test game this was for them as just, maybe just winning in general. Um, I guess we're about to find out this next coming week to see and start measuring how strength wise it is. Um, but again, you were playing a Dolphins team with just Bridgewater. It wasn't Tua, who's not, Tua's like the most explosive player on that field behind Waddle and Hill. But it's, Bridgewater doesn't really compare to Tua like that. So I don't know how much of a strength test that is for the Bengals, but I'm glad they won. So
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this football season's been so weird. We've seen a lot of teams that we didn't think to be good that are beating teams that we think to be good, and even like looking at trends gives you a really difficult time predicting who wins on a week in, week out basis. I hope this indicates that like the Bengals are going to have a stronger, next few games than they started, but I also like I guess I don't know how to take the strength, how to take their measurement as far as like Miami losing to Cincinnati, who hasn't looked good, but we also know Cincinnati to be AFC championships or AFC champions last season. On the other side, like Cincinnati obviously hasn't looked good, but to go and beat a team that was coming into this game as one of the last two undefeated teams, I guess we'll just see how the trends from the rest of the season play into this and what this game ends up meaning as we get a few more weeks under our belts.
right.
To switch though, obviously last week we talked some power rankings and teams we thought to be competitors, and it only makes sense to move on to the only other undefeated team coming into this week. I thought the Eagles and Jacksonville game was just a brilliant watch, regardless of the fact that I'm really excited the Eagles are the last undefeated team left. The one really big thing that I want to ask you, Noah, is I watched a lot of other really strong teams have some really weak points. And I know the Eagles started down 14-0, but I also don't know that I have any like really identifiable weaknesses or things that we've seen teams do in these first 4 weeks that really expose the Eagles to losing games later in the season.
Right. I think one thing we definitely saw was the fact that there were no big name pass catchers. Like obviously the Eagles had some injuries last minute that they couldn't play. And they went to the run game, and their run game performed. And previously in the few weeks we've seen like a more balanced, but if not more so just an air attack. And again, we saw Miles Sanders carry that offense. And so that was pretty fun to watch. Again, I don't see any, I guess, weaknesses. Obviously, there's going to be a few things here and there, depending on injuries and such. But again, I think that they've shown that they've battled this, and there's not a lot of things that can throw them off their game now. Again, even being down 14-0, not having, an air attack that's working too well, and they just went to the run game and they exploded from there. So I'm very excited to see where the Eagles will go. However, I'm not going to be like you and overreact to them. At the end of the day, they are still the Eagles. I do think that Jalen Hurts is an incredible quarterback. I think they got a nice team put together. But again, it was also against the Jaguars, who, the Jags have shown that they have some life to them this season, but it's nothing, like a top stellar team yet. So I guess I'm waiting to see on that big test for them.
I suppose that's fair. And I don't know when in the season we get that, just kind of looking through their schedule, but I mean, Sanders, I think, definitely made a name for himself. I mean, watching Eagles games, like he's been solid for years, but he's never been any sort of standout. But I mean, this season, like he's had a really, really, really good year. I think it speaks volume to their offense that like the play calling has been good. When the passing is there, the passing is there. When the running is there, the running is there. Their defense looks solid, both in the run game and pretty decent in the pass game, although the injury to Darius Slay hurts. I guess I just don't see any like big things to exploit from the Eagles. Like I mentioned with the Dolphins, they've been pretty good all season long, but I watched a spread offense with speed kind of take apart their defense on Thursday. Right. I guess I just don't see this anything similar to that in this Eagles team.
Agreed. But again, I'm just waiting for that big test.
The one thing that I will note for Jacksonville is that a weakness that I saw in that, like I've commented that I think their defense is significantly better than their offense. But what I noticed a lot on Sunday was that Trevor Lawrence was having a really difficult time throwing into traffic. If he wasn't throwing to one-on-one or to a guy open in the flat, they weren't getting any big yardage situations from like really contested receivers. I don't know if it's that he's not hitting like super precise throws or if the play calling just isn't there to put guys into better coverage positions, but he had a really difficult time throwing into traffic all day long on Sunday. I guess we'll move on. We'll start hitting some other games because I think those were the big ticket ones for me. I guess it makes the most sense to just go in the same order that we had picks this week. So Minnesota, New Orleans was the first game on Sunday, obviously in London. My biggest takeaway was that the Saints really looked like a high school team. They just didn't have any flash, any pizzazz. I mean, we saw that could possibly be realistic with their two biggest wide receivers out, but even taking away Jameis Winston and putting in Andy Dalton, it was just super boring to watch. Their offense just felt like they couldn't get anything together.
Right. Which is also kind of surprising to say just that in general, because, you have a team that goes out, scores 25 still, even with Andy Dalton, no two top receivers. But we'd had talked about how much of a difference the team is when they're missing their two top receivers. And I think we definitely saw it again. But on the other hand, for the Vikings, I think we saw Justin Jefferson kind of show up and he hasn't really shown up for the past two games. And I think he was good. He's kind of like getting back to where he was. So it was kind of nice to see and a nice change to see that Justin Jefferson was actually a part of the game.
Yeah, he very much got himself involved and he made big time plays. He felt like he was open all day long. But from the same wide receiver core, Adam Thielen put himself back on the map today. I always marvel at how open that guy is, even when he's not open. I saw 2 or 3 instances of him getting a ball thrown to him where he had no business catching the ball, but he managed to draw a penalty anyway, so that the ball came with him even when he didn't catch it. They just have such great weapons in that wide receiver core that it's hard for them to not win football games. Moving on, Tennessee and Indianapolis. The Colts are back to being the Colts. I don't know what it was we saw against the Chiefs, but they were terrible again yesterday, or Sunday rather.
Yeah, agreed. Again, I think still the Colts. But I do think, again, for the Titans, we saw Derrick Henry kind of come back. We haven't heard a lot from him the past few games. But again, he showed up in this game, and again, it was against the Colts, so I don't know how much of a strength test that is. Coming off that, I thought they would have more pizzazz coming off that, shocker against the Chiefs. But they came out flat-footed, and it just didn't. They weren't in the game. So
it's interesting to me mostly because looking at their roster at the beginning of the season, that was very similar to their roster last season, except an upgrade at quarterback. It's weird to see them not being able to generate the same things that they did last year. I mean, their defense was really solid last year, but Derrick Henry, who hasn't looked quite himself all season long, ran through them. Their run game just feels like they're never getting started, despite how good what's his name was last year. God, if I don't his name.
Jonathan Taylor.
Thank you. Despite how good he was last season, it feels like they just can never get him started. And Matt Ryan looks like he's putting up similar numbers here as he did with the Falcons his last couple of seasons, where he'll get a decent chunk of yard, 2 touchdowns and an interception, and you're just getting the same thing every week. It's really weird to see that on paper they should be a whole lot better than they are.
Yeah.
Moving to your Buffalo Bills against the Ravens. My man. So I've talked a little bit about weaknesses earlier, and I think I saw a lot more struggle from the Bills than I was ready to with a mobile quarterback. I recognize that they still won the game. They were still by far the better team all day long, but the places that I saw them struggle were mostly with handling Lamar Jackson, who I recognize is fantastic. He's super athletic, and every team is going to struggle somewhat, but they looked really disoriented at different points in time during the game handling him.
Agreed. So I wouldn't, as much as of a Bills fan I am, I wouldn't say that we were the better team, especially during the first half of this game. Again, we did, score 20 straight, and I will say the second half, we obviously found it, but I wouldn't go so far as saying that we were significantly the better team throughout the entire game. Um, Again, I did see a lot of weakness, and it's interesting because we hadn't seen this before. Obviously, in other games that we've played against some other mobile quarterbacks, nothing like Lamar Jackson. I guess Lamar Jackson could be his own separate category. Obviously, I think he's the most. I do think, though, however, Jalen Hurts is kind of standing up with Lamar. But my point is that again, we haven't had that strength test of this good of a mobile quarterback. I think during the regular season. Again, we known that the Ravens are good during the regular season, and then they crash and burn during the postseason. So again, this was a good strength test. I think just in general, the Ravens are a decent team. So I'm glad we won, but it was scary when we were down 17. So
Yeah, I recognize that they took that early deficit, but I think it like only highlighted their strengths in a really weird way. They turned the ball over early, and if you're going to turn it over, I'd much rather give it away in the first quarter than in the fourth. But Josh Allen put that game in his own hands, and he is something special, and he's going to be for a long time. Like the idea that you can be down 17, but he's going to run on a 3rd and 11 and make sure that he gets that first down because he's bigger than you, faster than you, stronger than you. And if he can't run the ball on a 3rd and 11, he's just going to pass it over your head to whoever's open because, like, in a weird way, having that deficit, like, confirmed to me how good I already thought the Bills were.
Right. And again, I think, that game might have been a little bit different if they hadn't gone for it on fourth, the Ravens. And, throwing that pick, it kind of just, again, like we were saying, it confirmed the Bills being good. It also confirmed that the Ravens choke pretty consistently. And that's something scary to see for them. So,
yeah, I think it'll make it pretty interesting in the offseason when it comes time to actually pay Lamar Jackson this time, but got to wait a little while for that one. Next, I got the Chargers in Houston. Austin Eckler, and I think that's enough said. That guy, I don't know how he's still doing it to this level, but my God, was he good.
End of the day, that's just Eckler being Eckler. And, we've seen him become that star since moving Melvin Gordon out a few years ago. And I think he's just proving time and time again that, he belongs in this league and, as a top 5 running back right now. So definitely he's amazing. And, again, it was against the Texans, but, Austin Eckler is still being himself. So I wouldn't put too much disrespect on that game, even though it was against the Texans.
Yeah, I guess the things that concerned me slightly were the Chargers letting Houston come back towards the end. I mean, I know they still won by 2 scores, but they really took their foot off the gas again. It seemed hard to me to effectively take your foot off the gas that hard when Eckler had the kind of day that he did, but I mean, it didn't turn into any scoring for quite some time, but obviously they still pulled it out. The other thing I want to touch on from last week is we talked about Justin Herbert looking uncomfortable. He looked like he was throwing awkwardly all day. I mean, he still made effective passes. He got the ball where it needed to be. He still had a really good day through the air, but physically he looked uncomfortable, and I just don't know how sustainable it is for him to keep playing this way with that injury appearing to bother him so bad.
Right. And again, we had discussed that last week when, I was saying, it's easy for me to say just set him and, all that. But again, if they're winning and, you trust Austin Eckler, then, you should have no problem letting, Herbert take a few weeks to rest up and, make sure that everything is good. Again, it depends on the schedule and everything if you want to be in the playoffs. But against this Texans team, you would think that, it's the Texans and we don't want to hurt our quarterback more than usual. So, but again, going back to the injuries, it's kind of scary to just play with an injury. So it just makes it worse.
Absolutely. I did skip a game here, but injuries is a nice transition to go back to Chicago and the Giants. Justin Fields is still wowing me every single week. Guy does it in the air, does it on the ground. He looks really, really good. But the Giants defense is the biggest part of that game for me. All day long, they'd let up the yards, but they wouldn't let the Bears into the end zone. I think at the end of the day, it was 5 field goals and like on 5 red zone possessions. Like I find it very difficult to let yourself be in the red zone that many times and to still not give up a touchdown from there with a guy playing as well as Justin Fields is. I think the Giants defense is very much for real.
Again, I've been ragging on this team because of the Giants and their defense. I didn't trust it. I'm not sure if I entirely trust it yet. But again, I think they showed up. I think they showed out. I got to stop talking hate on them because unfortunately they did win this game for the Giants. Again, it was against the Bears who, again, Justin Fields has been playing like a star right now. And it's really weird to say that. But again, it didn't expect the Giants to win this, but their defense definitely carried them, and that's pretty impressive. Again, the stats that you brought up, I think it was 4-4.
Yeah, it was something like that. But
yeah, still, 4 times they're knocking on the door, and you only allow 3 points each time, so that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was nice to see the defense be that good. Because I mean, Saquon Barkley, that guy's back. He had himself another day. I mean, he looked fantastic. But to lose both of your first 2 quarterbacks, Dan Jones was playing pretty well until he got hurt. But then the second string quarterback to also be out. Like, it was nice to see that even with their 2 first quarterbacks out, they still had enough defense to carry them to win that game. And I don't think Chicago's any slouch. Like, I think that's a good win for the Giants, especially knowing that the defense was able to hold Justin Fields and the Bears that way that your third string quarterback can win a football game. I genuinely believe that if the Giants can just generate a little bit more offense, that they could be a real threat to a lot of teams in the league. Moving on, Seattle and Detroit. Noah actually messaged me during this game. I wasn't watching it at the time, but he's like, what the hell is going on with the Seahawks and the Lions? Holy offense. That was a ton of points. Congrats to everyone who bet the over, because Jesus, that was a ton of points. I guess the big thing for me from this one is that I still think that the Lions looked like the better team, but the defense obviously is a problem, and the turnovers late were what really lost them that game if their defense wasn't going to hold.
Right. Again, we talked about talking about the Saints and saying that they performed badly when they scored, 20 or 25. But here we are, and the Lions scored 45, which is wow. Just, and they still lost the game, which is just in numbers and statistical POV. That's absurd. The Seahawks, again, they scored 48, so it's just 3. But I agreed. I think the Lions are still the better team. I think they performed way above what they were supposed to. Again, I do think those, fourth quarter turnovers, it killed them. And, that's rather unfortunate. But still putting up 22 in the fourth in a massive, comeback attempt there is pretty incredible. So I was a fan of this game just because we saw 2 teams that weren't on the top of our list just show out. And that's incredible.
Offense is always exciting. Especially, I guess I'm most impressed with the Lions' ability to generate offense without any contribution from Swift. Obviously, you've been raving about if you guys have been listening to this podcast, but I really thought that Detroit played a really impressive game, even in a loss. I think it kind of warns the rest of the league to take note that the Lions aren't a free win anymore. I would be remiss in also not mentioning DK Metcalf's bathroom break. That man needed a cart to take a shit. I just...
Listen, at least it wasn't a wheelchair like Paul Pierce, okay?
Fair enough. I appreciate him having fun and tweeting about it after the game, though. Just fully yep, it was a bathroom break, man. So, but good for Seattle for a win. That's not an easy one, and I think at this rate they could use most of what they can get. Pittsburgh and the Jets. This one was all about quarterbacks for me. Seeing Zach Wilson come back, he looked really, really good on every single drive until they got down into a place where scoring was within reach, and then it was either a turnover or just bad decisions. He looked good everywhere but the red zone. I don't know how much hope this should give the Jets that they could see success with Zach Wilson, even if not this year, somewhere down the line?
Again, I didn't really pay attention to this game, but I will say just again, based off Zach Wilson and the Jets, um, they played a sloppy game. So again, and the fact that they still won, granted it was the Steelers, I'm not sure how much of a strength test that is. I again, we've seen the Jets have Zach Wilson before at QB1, and they haven't performed. They're not a top team. So again, I wouldn't take this game as too much. I think the Jets are still going to be the Jets, and they should probably still be looking for another quarterback.
Oh, I obviously not watching much of this game. I don't know how much input you have. I was a guy who was very high on Kenny Pickett coming out of college. I thought he was exceptionally good at Pitt with a real smart head on his shoulders. And I thought he was undervalued in the draft, but getting to see him finally play football over Mitch Trubisky was fantastic. I recognize that he threw 3 interceptions. I'm not going to fault him for 2 of those, but regardless, 3 picks is still not a very good day for your debut. Do you foresee Kenny Pickett doing anything for this team that Mitchell Trubisky couldn't?
Again, I've watched college ball. I didn't watch this game too much, so I didn't actually see him play. But again, in college, he was great, and so I think that just in general, when I heard them pick it up, it was a good pickup, a good steal. So I do expect that he's going to be able to kind of provide some spark into the Steelers' offense here that we haven't seen from Trubisky. Again, it's Trubisky. So again, going forward, I know he was named the starter from now, but again, I do expect to see some spark from the Steelers and maybe a little bit more fight, and maybe be able to beat the lowly Jets.
Yeah, I always get worried about guys coming in too soon on rookie campaigns. I mean, not to say that you can't walk in and have success immediately, because we've seen plenty of guys do it. But I'm a Kenny Pickett fan. I root for the kid and think he's genuinely going to be something special if he gets the potential to do so. So I kind of hope we can see Pittsburgh turn it around a little bit. Next one I have is Washington and Dallas. Watching this game, it felt closer than I think the score would have indicated. But I guess my biggest question is with the way that Cooper Rush is playing, a really consistent, stable force. How inclined do you believe that Dallas feels to bring back Dak early rather than letting him get a couple extra weeks of rest, especially since they're still winning football games?
Again, I actually did follow up on this. I knew this question was coming because I know you don't like Cooper Rush. I know you've been ragging on him, but he's performed. He's carried this team right now to a few wins here, and I think they're winning. And they said that even though Dak might be available this coming week, that they're still going to sit him, let him rest up. So I don't think they're in a rush. I think if we see, even if they weren't rushing him back for like 3 weeks, right? And then we see the Cowboys all of a sudden lose 3 in a row, then I think it's a more uneven, territory that you guys are in, and you probably would rush him back. But again, I think that Cooper Rush is able to lead this team to wins right now and just keep, again, what we were talking with Bridgewater, just keep them above sinking. And he's doing more than that. Obviously, he's winning games. So again, I wouldn't be rushing Dak back at any pace. As long as we're winning, I just keep Cooper Rush and just wait for Dak to be fully healthy.
I guess it kind of reminds me, as an Eagles fan, I remember the controversy pretty strongly between Tony Romo and Dak Prescott. And I remember thinking at the time when they were talking about Jerry Jones is all up on his soapbox about Tony Romo's our quarterback. I don't care how much Dak Prescott's winning, right? But I remember thinking that Tony Romo was significantly then less good, even at his best, than Dak Prescott was. And I preferred to see Romo back as an Eagles fan because I didn't want the Cowboys winning. This one to me feels like the cards are much more in their hands and not necessarily leaving it up to Jerry Jones's ego. To see Cooper Rush win games, I mean, I know that their schedule hasn't necessarily been the strongest, but he's still playing well enough to win. Statistically, he's been great. He's been a really steady force in the backfield. But I guess I know that Dak Prescott's probably a better quarterback, and to know that they can sit on him and wait to make sure he's fully healthy kind of makes the Cowboys really intimidating.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, again, if Cooper Rush wasn't playing as well as he was, right now, then you would rush him back. But again, like you were just saying, you have a decent backup quarterback right now, and the fact that they're still winning games, again, you had mentioned that it wasn't as close as the score would suggest, but it's still a 15-point win. That's still scary with a backup. And you're on the way of getting your starter back. So I will agree that the Cowboys are a little scary right now.
Yeah, I think too the other part of that helps is knowing that their defense is still a pretty stable force, and that Carson Wentz is still Carson Wentz. So next one I've got is actually one of the very few games I don't have a lot of notes for. Atlanta and Cleveland was one of the most boring football games I've ever watched. There was no big takeaways. There was nothing I learned. It's that I guess the Falcons are playing better than expected, but still not winning a ton, and that the Browns are playing just above average that might sneak them into the playoffs. I felt like I got nothing out of this one.
Again, I didn't even watch this game. I watching the recaps and everything. So again, the Falcons jumped out to a 10-point lead. They fumbled it actually pretty quickly, but then again, they came back in the fourth to win. Again, I think that says more about the Browns not being able to hold on to a lead per se, especially with a defense that is so highly rated, especially with Myles Garrett and everything. Again, he was in that car accident, but still.
Yeah,
I don't really know what to say about this.
Yeah, just
there's
not
really so much we can only say. I'm just waiting until week 10 when Deshaun Watson comes back, and that's it.
Yeah, just not a lot to get out of this one, but I mean, I guess they're one of or two of the very few teams that I can say that like I feel pretty confident in knowing who they are. Right. We'll move on to Arizona and Carolina. The place I want to start here kind of wraps back up to Tua. Obviously, we talked earlier about him, being injured and what responsibility the Dolphins have with, playing him when he was very clearly injured. Meanwhile, J.J. Watt tweeted out before this game that he had an irregular heartbeat electrically stimulated to fix it on Thursday before this game, and he was allowed to play just 3 days after the issues that we saw with Tua coming back from significant injury early. I don't know about you, but I felt very uncomfortable by that. I just, knowing what we learned on Thursday and then for J.J. Watt to tweet it out on his own felt very disheartening, I guess.
Yeah, again, we've seen, injuries, and I think that is like, even doing something like that is just really sketchy. I wouldn't, especially that like soon after. Obviously, I would, keep an eye on it. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like my heart was having irregular heartbeat. I'd just be like, yeah, we'll keep an eye on. I'm not going to play a football game that causes enough stress that might kill me. So, again, that's just, I don't know. I don't know how I feel.
It just kind of sat funny with me, and I don't know that we made enough of it on Sunday rather than for us to bring it back up now. But as far as the game itself goes, I felt that I had a difficult time discerning whether Kyler Murray is playing down to his competition or if he just genuinely looks that weak without his wide receivers in front of him. Obviously, I know having more targets who are really good on the field helps him, but he just didn't look like he had a whole lot of concern for that game. He just kind of went through the motions rather than feeling like he was like a super athletic, super invested Kyler Murray.
Again, though, we've had that same conversation of the past few weeks. Like the Cardinals start off flat. They're not like, there in the game, but then fourth quarter comes and it's, oh shit, it's time to win. Like we need to score now. So I'm almost interested to see if Kyler's like, it sounds dumb, but if he's just like doing that on purpose to have more thrill at the end of the game, maybe. But again, he doesn't seem involved in the game in the first half. He does like that's all the past 4 games. Again, we've seen them win the past this week and then 2 weeks ago, but that was all in the fourth quarter and overtime. So it's interesting to see that going forward. And again, it was against the Panthers. Like they should have been leading in the first half at some point. So yeah,
I guess it didn't like resonate with me that strongly when he was playing against the Rams, right? To see it in fourth quarter and overtime against the Rams, like, okay, we thought the Rams were a pretty good team. To see it against the Raiders at the time, we thought the Raiders were better than they've shown, right? But I guess to see it against the Panthers, who we watched struggle really significantly, I think it just accentuated it even more so that like he just really felt like he was playing down to the Panthers rather than playing the game we know he's capable of. Obviously he's down more receivers, but I don't know. I guess I just kind of want that offense to wake up and show me what they're actually capable of, so I know how to feel about him.
Right. I guess we'll see that in a few weeks though when DeAndre Hopkins comes back.
Yeah, I think we get the next 2 weeks without him, but hopefully him coming back will help out. So we'll see how it goes. Moving on to Denver and Las Vegas. Denver had really good special team success, and it felt like the only places they were good were special teams. The Raiders, on the other hand, looked way better than a 1-3 team. I recognize that it took them playing Denver, so it's not necessarily a good indicator of how strong they are, but I felt like they were playing really solid football. Derek Carr looked like he was back to form. The defense performed strongly. The rest of the offense had their stuff together. I guess watching this game, even as thoroughly as I did, which wasn't that much, I guess, like it very much surprises me to know that this was the Raiders' first win.
Right. Again, we haven't seen the Raiders be the good team that we had talked them up to be until this game. Again, it was against the Broncos, so strength test probably not there. But again, they did show that they have some life. Again, it wasn't going to be an 0-4 start, which is good. I guess it will be interested to see how they're going to perform going up against some other teams. Again, we've seen them crash and burn against some stronger teams. Their first win coming against the Broncos here, who aren't really that good. So again, strength-wise, I guess we have to see if they're back or if it was just they somehow found a way to win convincingly against a really poor team.
Yeah, I think I'm most excited to see them go up against other teams in that division, right? I mean, the past couple of seasons, their games against the Chargers and the Chiefs have been competitive, even in games that they've lost. And I'm hoping that picking it up against Denver, can be an indicator that they're ready to compete with the rest of their division, especially since that division kind of looks a little bit down. The next one I've got is New England at Green Bay. So obviously New England's got some quarterback issues. If Mac Jones wasn't enough, I think it definitely is going to tank their season to know that they've got 2 quarterbacks out in an already struggling offense. But the biggest thing for me was the first half of that game, Aaron Rodgers only threw 6 passes. And against a team in New England that struggled so bad, it took Aaron Rodgers playing well through overtime to overcome and get a win.
Right.
I was very surprised to see Rodgers have so little impact on that game until the very end, when it felt like if he got involved early and played as well as we saw him do in overtime, that game should have been over by the end of the first quarter.
Agreed. I hadn't watched the game too much, but I did see a video on Twitter of their head coach just sighing a breath of relief after winning it. There is no reason why the Patriots should be in that game. A third string quarterback, and they're in it, not only, but with the real chance to win. For the Packers, I know obviously they have a 3-1 record. I think that speaks more to the Packers not being as strong as we think they are. I know we talked about the division in general, but I think that 3-1 record is very misleading. I don't think they're the same team, and I'm actually kind of concerned for their chances in the playoffs. I think they might be a first-round exit.
Well, we've mentioned strength tests quite a bunch in this episode, but I guess the strength test that I want for the Packers is the Vikings, is the Lions. Teams that we've watched be better than we expected, and even in losses look strong. And Green Bay winning these games, but not at all convincingly and in very strange fashions. I think the real test of how good the Packers actually are is to start playing games in their division against teams that have shown that they're better than we expected.
Right. I think that another thing, we had previously talked about the transitive property, right? And how, if we can say this team beat this team, maybe they can beat this team. I think right now, I think both the Vikings and the Lions can easily beat the Packers. And that's scary to say because we haven't been able to say that, especially the Lions, right? We've been able to kind of like maybe the Vikings would put up a fight. But right now, I think that with the way they're both playing, I think it's better than the Packers. And I think, again, going back to what you said, playing those division games, I think it'd be really bad for the Packers because I think both the Vikings and Lions could easily beat the Packers right now.
Especially the way they're playing. It very much surprises me to know that Rodgers is really taking something off. I don't know what happened to him or where he's going. I can blame the ayahuasca all I want, but at the end of the day, I know that he should be better than this. We even saw a little bit in overtime that he was throwing the ball super accurately down the field, 10 to 15 yards with ease, and it's still like only 6 passes in the first half, and taking all of overtime to actually put that game away. Beyond
Right.
me. Getting into Sunday night, Kansas City at Tampa Bay. Mahomes he's a goddamn magician. I still don't know how that man does half the things he does. That one highlight that we all saw 65,000 times about him spinning away from defenders, getting to the line of scrimmage, and shovel passing it to McKinnon. I still have no idea how he had the vision for that. But like, as an overall whole, the Chiefs' offense went back to looking dominant. I mean, I know that Tampa Bay hasn't necessarily floored us this season, but I don't think they're any slouch. I don't think they're a walkover win. Kansas City's offense to look that good the whole game leads me to believe that maybe Kansas City is getting back to a target we expected to.
Agreed. I think this, we saw the Chiefs kind of come right out and punch the Bucs in the mouth. Again, we always, every year, every season, there's always a new Patty Mahomes highlight. It's always some crazy shit like that. But again, seeing them put a beat down on, a strong, decent Buccaneers team, maybe their offense isn't the same as it was. It's a good win for them. And I think it kind of sends that message again that maybe like last week we weren't so sure about them, but right now they're playing at a good enough that, they're still the Chiefs and still Patrick Mahomes leading them. So they're still a scary team.
And the last game I've got, the Rams and the 49ers on Monday night. This game kind of surprised me how one-sided it felt. But my big questions are mostly like, well, I guess not a question for my first one, but just Deebo Samuel is that guy. There's nothing else to say about him. He is that man.
Right. Again, he got paid for it. He is definitely that guy, like you're saying. But again, going to the Rams, it's kind of scary now. I'm actually very concerned for them. Obviously, saw them just but this is against the Niners team that's playing with their second string quarterback. And again, that's not saying that Jimmy Garoppolo isn't a good quarterback. It's just the team is down, but they still put a absolute beatdown on the Rams, who, in my eyes were a Super Bowl contender. And now it's kind of scary to see the Niners, play like they were back when they made the Super Bowl the first time.
I think the interesting part to me is to talk again about that transitive property, right? Like last week when the 49ers played the Broncos, right? Like that was a 1-point game, right? Like there was not a lot of scoring. It didn't look super impressive, but to see it this week, I'm seeing like the 49ers really take it to the Rams, who I didn't think were a bad team. And I'm wondering if that maybe skews your opinion of how much better the AFC could potentially be than the NFC. We've talked about it a couple of times that like I think the real contenders from the AFC are going to be stronger just because there isn't a lot of competition in the NFC. But to know that the 49ers and the Broncos played a really tight 1-point game, and then the 49ers to run over an NFC favorite like the Rams this week, I'm wondering what we can take away from that.
Again, I think that, previously when we started the season, we thought there was going to be less competition in the AFC. And I think that still stands true. I think that we've seen now, 4 games in, we've seen teams that we didn't anticipate be good and playing well. Again, so I think that there's a lot more competition in the NFC. I'm thinking there's a lot of teams here that we might have said, talked up that might not even, make it to their respective championships. So
the other thing I want to ask about with that game specifically is how you feel about the NFC West now. I mean, this week was obviously a weird one for the NFC West. I mean, we watched the Seahawks put a ton of points on the board. The Rams losing to the 49ers, and even though we said the 49ers were good and could compete, I don't know that I expected them to be that significantly better than the Rams. I mean, what are you foreseeing for the division for the rest of this year if this is the kind of stuff we're getting in week 4?
Again, seeing this loss to the Niners scared me in a bit. But again, we've seen the same thing last season. They lost both games to the Niners in regular season. But then came postseason, and the Rams were significantly better in that game. Again, enough to win. So I'm not entirely sure. I might just think that maybe the Rams just don't play that well against the Niners. Trends have shown that the Rams just don't perform, specifically against the Niners for some reason. Obviously we've seen them lose other games, but the Niners are sort of horse they can't, handle right now. But I think I still put the Rams to be my favorite coming out of that division. And I still think I put the Cardinals second, and I think the Niners are still third. Again, the Seahawks scoring 48. It's against the Lions defense. Like, I understand, the Lions have obviously significantly improved, but it's still the Lions defense. Like, I'm not going to put much stock into that. But again, that was just a fireworks of offenses. But I still think that the Rams come out of the West.
Man, it's getting harder for me to tell. I kind of had my doubts about the Niners, early on in the season. Like, I really didn't think they were going to have a whole ton of success in that division because I thought the Cardinals were going to be better than they've shown us. And truly, I didn't think that, like, even if they beat the Rams, it wouldn't have surprised me. But to beat them like this was very surprising. I guess I'm putting a lot more faith in the 49ers stock than I was at the beginning of the season to at least shake up that division a little more than expected. I can't necessarily count out the Rams or the Cardinals from a whole season perspective, but I definitely wouldn't be as surprised anymore to see the 49ers towards the top of that ranking at the end. All right. I guess that moves us through all of the games. Just some overall notes that I had. I watched creativity score consistently all weekend long. Even if it was just play action plays or flea flickers, end arounds, like just not calling standard from the pocket plays, was scoring consistently for a lot of teams all around the league all weekend long. Another thing that I kind of brought up in bits and pieces throughout going through the games, but I think a lot of really good teams showed us some weaknesses. Obviously, we saw Kansas City lose to the Colts, and you could get your takeaways from that. I mentioned Miami suffering to the spread offense, and I certainly mentioned Buffalo struggling with a super dynamic quarterback like Lamar Jackson. But I also watched Dallas struggle more than I thought they should have against a really subpar Carson Wentz. Jacksonville, like I mentioned, struggling to get receivers who weren't wide open. And Detroit just not being able to necessarily make stops against not good teams. Again, the one place that I struggle to come up with any real weaknesses is the Eagles. I know if you ask any Eagles fan, they'd want to fire everyone on special teams because the punt returns are awful. But genuinely, if your game strategy is to start punting on second down and hope they muff it, you're probably going to lose to the Eagles, not because they're good, but because you punt it all the time. I guess I'm really interested to see what kind of parity it adds that we're like this early in the season. I guess we can identify some weaknesses in teams that we still believe to be really, really strong.
Right. But then again, you also have to think you're also extremely biased because, it's the Eagles.
Usually I try to be super critical against the Eagles. And I mean, I just like watching these games, man, I want to find something wrong so I can talk myself out of that end of season hype, because there's nothing worse than that heartbreak every single year of being an Eagles fan. But I guess I'm just really struggling to find any real significant you can plan around this. I would like to see it so that I know that they're working on it, but it's hard for me to find.
Right.
I guess we'll move into fantasy. I know you had a couple of notes there.
Yeah. Few things. We watched some quarterbacks on starting teams not have really good fantasy games. It was actually quite surprising. Obviously, quarterbacks are a big portion of the points. they consistently, if you have a good starter, they consistently put up 20 plus. And a lot of quarterbacks that were on decent teams did not perform well, which is just something to note. I was kind of like, oh. But the biggest thing for me was tight ends on big teams. So obviously, not including Travis Kelce, okay? Because Travis Kelce is just a different breed. But I'm talking like Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, all of these on decent teams that are, contenders for us. They are not using their tight ends as much as they have previously. And I don't know if maybe they're just trying to get away from the throwing, or maybe it's just better to run right now. But again, they're not using their tight ends like we've seen previously. I know that I've always put a lot into Darren Waller, the tight end for the Raiders. He's always performed, and again, like this week he didn't. Again, Mark Andrews only had like 3.5 points, and it was only like 2 catches. So it's not really that. I just don't see a lot of production. But then you go over to the Lions, Tyler Hawkinson, and he dropped like 40 points. And again, we're talking, a lot of offense for the Lions, but still, that's not a big name we talk about when we talk about tight ends. And the fact that he was able to drop such a huge amount of points is pretty surprising. So,
yeah, I've noticed that like it's having the right tight end on the right week. Again, excluding Travis Kelce because that dude's good for 25 every time he touches a field. But like, it's been very difficult. I mean, you mentioned Mark Andrews specifically. I know the previous week, he scored 2 touchdowns. I mean, he had a monstrous week, but then to go and get 2 touches and 15 yards for 3.5 points, like just it's hard to rely on the consistency of tight ends. Even though there were plenty of tight ends around the league this week that had really big games, they probably weren't guys that you consider to be consistent or in your lineup week after week after week.
Right.
The other thing I noticed some value this week for fantasy was dynamic players. There were a lot of guys. I know I mentioned Deebo Samuel earlier, but like guys that are playing multiple positions, doing different roles, even running backs that are getting catches from the backfield on really pass-heavy offenses are like they provided a lot of value this week. I know they're always good to pick up in your draft, and I'm not saying go out and find that hidden one in your free agent roster, but like I really think it speaks to how strong it is to draft like these guys that are doing multiple different jobs every single week.
Right, utility players and such. Again, going to that, like again, we saw those kind of players explode. So that was definitely fun to see. I agree, and it's definitely hard to find though. But it also depends on how much their team uses them. So.
Yeah, can make it tough to rely on them week after week. But I mean, this week specifically, I noticed a lot of guys playing a lot of different roles. So, all right, I think that moves us into our gambling picks. I'd like to reclaim my throne and actually have a better week this week. I would also like to point out that in every game that Noah and I split, I took it. I don't know whether to be proud of that or just really fucking lucky, but I'm going to take it one way or another. Noah went 6-10 this week. I went 11-5 this week. Actually ties us back up and puts us both at 25-39. I think we'll just go pretty quick hits because we're already running a little longer than we usually do. So, just real quick, Colts, Broncos. Broncos are -3 at home.
I'm going the Colts here. Unfortunately, as much as the Broncos have disappointed and the Colts have disappointed, I think the Colts on paper are still a better team than the Broncos. So unfortunately, even though the Broncos are at home, I still expect the Colts to win this somehow.
It's hard for me to know at this point who's the better team. But when it's 3 points, it's kind of tough. I trust Russell Wilson more than I've seen out of the Colts this season. I'm taking the Broncos. Next, I got the Giants at the Packers. Packers are 8.5 favorites at home. Look, everything I've said about the Giants and the Packers all podcast long would indicate to believe that I'm going to take the Giants with 8.5 points. But being down 2 quarterbacks, kind of hard for me to believe in it. I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm going to take the Giants, but it's a much, much, much weaker pick than it should have been.
Listen, I've ragged on the Giants for 4 weeks now, and I'm going to do it one time just for this week. If the Giants show up then I will literally bet with them every single game. I don't care. But I do think the Packers will win this. I think their offense is just a little too much. I think this will be a real strength test for the Giants to kind of see, even though the Packers aren't playing as well. I think it will be a nice strength test for the Giants, but I still expect the Packers to win this.
All right, I got the Seahawks at the Saints. Saints are 5.5 favorites at home. Yeah, I'm going to take your disagreement there, and I'm going to join you. Seahawks put up way too many points this week. Saints offense looked underwhelming. I think it's rough for me to believe the Saints should be that big of favorites at home.
Agreed.
Steelers at the Bills. Bills are 14-point favorites.
Well, you know where I stand on this, and again, we just saw the Steelers not look as good. Obviously, you can hype up your rookie all you want, but still the Bills at the end of the day, and I think they're gonna kind of have a trounce from last week and play a lot better here. So I don't know if 2 touchdowns. I feel like that's pretty big, but I'm gonna put my faith in the Bills here.
Look, it's the NFL, and 14 is really hard to cover. It's hard to win by 14, regardless of whatever the spread. Like, any 2 teams to play against each other, it is hard to win by 14. I do genuinely believe that the Bills are 2 touchdowns better than the Steelers, probably, and then some. But it is so hard to win a game by 14 points. I have to take the Steelers. All right, I have the Bears at the Vikings. Vikings are 7-point favorites at home.
This is going to be a good game.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one. I think I can trust the Bears to keep it within a touchdown. I mean, God knows we've talked about the Bears enough in this podcast to know that we both believe in them. But I think the Bears are, while the Vikings are probably better, I think the Bears are good enough to keep it within a touchdown.
Agreed.
All right, I have the Texans at the Jaguars. Jaguars are 7-point favorites at home.
I don't know.
For me, I'm taking the Jags. I think the Jags are a really good team. I think Houston's defense is not that good. I don't trust Houston to score. This one, even if this were a 14-point spread, I might still take the Jags. I think they're playing better football than their schedule has allowed their record to look. Texans are just not good.
I would love to go against you on this, but I do have to agree. I think the Jags are playing a little bit better than we anticipated, obviously, and it's still the Texans. So Jags all the way.
All right, I have the Dolphins at the Jets. Dolphins are 3.5 favorites on the road, even without Tua. I know they're the Jets, and I know they're not that great. But, like I mentioned earlier, I think Zach Wilson looked really good everywhere but the red zone. I think that's stuff that they could probably clean up. That being said, I think the Dolphins are still better. Bridgewater is still a better quarterback. I think that he showed that he can handle this offense, even if he's not as explosive, and taking the Dolphins.
Agreed. I have to go with the Dolphins here.
All right. I have Falcons-Bucks. Bucks are 8.5 favorites at home.
I think that's pretty fair, actually. I think that, we haven't seen the Bucks play as well as we thought they would. But I think this past week, putting up 31 against the Chiefs kind of showed that, maybe with all the injuries coming back, all the receivers coming back, that maybe Tom is still a decent enough quarterback to win by more than 8 points. So I'll go Bucks here.
I'm gonna fade you on that one. The Falcons have scored a lot of points, especially late in games. They've kept every game they've played in close, even when they're the losers and not nearly as good a team. The Falcons have put up a lot of points, and even if Tom Brady did look better this past week than in the rest of the season, I still find it hard to believe that they've shown me enough to believe that they're 8.5 points better than the Falcons. I have Lions at the Patriots. Patriots are 3-point favorites. I can't put my faith in that one. The Patriots are down 2 quarterbacks. No, the Lions just put up 45 points in a loss. Like, I know their defense isn't great, but the Patriots offense is even worse while healthier. I recognize losing DeAndre Swift hurts, but man, the Lions are just so much a better team here.
Yeah, agreed. Obviously, we've been riding the Lions hype train, and we're going to continue to do so here. So,
I've got Titans at Washington. Titans are 2.5 favorites on the road.
listen, we've seen the Commanders just be bad, man, and it's just Carson Wentz. And so, obviously, I'm going to go Titans here. All the Titans kind of against not a high ranked opponent this past week, but they still won, and it's the Commanders. So I gotta go Titans.
I don't think Washington's defense is super good. We watched the Titans have a pretty good week, and Carson Wentz is still Carson Wentz. Taking the Titans. Chargers and the Browns. Chargers are 3-point favorites on the road.
I guess it depends on Herbert. I don't know. I feel like the Browns are good enough to keep this within 3. And I think the Chargers right now, I don't think Herbert's the same quarterback he was, obviously, just because of the injury. So I'm going with the Chargers. And I think that's I think the Browns will keep this within 3.
Man, I don't know how to feel about it, because I feel like both of these teams are not as good as I expected them to be. I really want to learn a lot, and them playing each other isn't going to teach me a lot. I think just to take it the other way, add some parity, I think I'm going to take the Browns, but I tell you, I have no faith in either one of these teams to pick them. So, all right, I've got the Niners at the Panthers. 49ers are 6.5 favorites on the road.
I don't know.
Man, for me, watching the 49ers beat the Rams, I know that the Rams are better than the Panthers. I have no reason not to pick the Niners.
Agreed. That being said, though, I wouldn't be surprised if the Niners just put out 0 at the same time. I think that, just in general, it's kind of a hit or miss with the Niners right now. So I'm gonna go Panthers.
Okay. Man, it hurts, doesn't it?
Yeah. Doesn't taste.
All right. I've got the Eagles at the Cardinals. Eagles are 5.5 favorites.
Well, I know where you are on this one.
I think I'll surprise you, because genuinely, I think I'm going to take the Cardinals if you're giving them 5.5. I think the Eagles are the better team. I think the Eagles are probably going to look better through the game. But like you mentioned earlier, Kyler Murray's just kind of turned on the Jets in the fourth quarter, and I think the final score is going to end up being pretty close. While the game won't feel close, I think the score is going to stay within 5.5 at the end. So I'm taking the Cardinals with the points.
See, again, I know it was my own words that said those things.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think, Jalen Hurts is playing out of his mind. And when he hasn't been last game, that team was still able to win, not with as much production from him. So I'm going Eagles. I think it will, as like you said, it will be a close game, but I'm going Eagles.
Okay. I got the Cowboys and the Rams. Rams are 4.5 favorites at home. That line kind of surprised me. Really, because the Cowboys just keep winning football games, and the Rams didn't show me a whole lot this past week. I haven't seen anything yet that's going to make me doubt the Cowboys' ability to just win football games, so I'm going with Dallas.
Agreed. I'm going to have to go with the Cowboys, as much as a weird thing to say, especially against the Rams that, were a Super Bowl contender, to us even like last week. I will go with the Cowboys. I do agree with that.
All right. Sunday night's game, I think, is going to be super interesting. This one, I'm actually excited to learn about these teams and how they would fare against each other. Bengals at the Ravens. Ravens are 3-point favorites at home.
I gotta go Bengals here. I think they won in... I don't even know, actually.
I'm going to take the Ravens. I still wholeheartedly believe that the Bills are the best top to bottom, front to back team in the league, and the Ravens really, really gave him a game. I know the Bengals beat the Dolphins, but I guess I'm not sure how much of a difference Tua would have made. Body of work, I don't think the Bengals have had the same season that the Ravens did. It's a tough one. It really genuinely is, but I think I'm taking the Ravens at home.
I'm going to stick with the Bengals just because, we've seen them win 2 games in a row. And I'm hoping that maybe carrying that momentum will be enough to beat out a Ravens team. But agreed, I'm not picking this confidently. I think the Ravens have every, if not more of a chance to win, but I'm going Bengals right now because underdogs.
Yeah. All right. I have Monday night's game then is Raiders-Chiefs. Chiefs are 7.5 favorites at home. I want wholeheartedly for that division to be super good, super competitive, play really good games. But the Chiefs look like they found their footing fully on offense last week. The Raiders did look better last week than a 1-3 team, but at the end of the day, they're still 1-3. It's hard for me to pick against the Chiefs here.
Right. Again, we talked about strength tests a lot this week. I think this will be a really good strength test for the Raiders. I think if they're able to win or not even win, but keep it close, I think we learn a lot that the Raiders will be decent and probably, they were just having 3 slow games. But again, I did see the Chiefs play like the Chiefs last week. So I'm going to go Raiders here.
Okay.
I'm just the hope kind of, but at the same time, I know I shouldn't count Patrick Mahomes out, and that's going to be scary.
Yeah, this week definitely featured a bunch of tough games. I hope that there's stuff that we're going to learn this week, and man, just a bunch of games that I hope are really good. I want to see really good football with some of these matchups this week, but again, hopefully we get our fantasy overall scores back closer to 500 at the very least. As always, lines are provided by FanDuel as of Tuesday afternoon and are subject to change. Please gamble responsibly. Remember that we're not providing fantasy advice, just solely providing our picks for games. If you or loved one has a gambling problem, please call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, before we wrap this one up, you got anything else I missed this week? Anything else you got to say before we get out of here? All right.
Just go Bills.
Go Birds. All right, on that one, we'll wrap it up. We will see you guys next week on Tuesday. Have a good week.